Thank you, Jeff. I'm glad to be here today. I'm very pleased that Jeff picked the 27 groups of exercises as one of the required texts, I guess I can say that, for the camp here. And in fact, that's how I first learned of Earl D. Irons, was when I bought a copy of 27 groups of exercises at the direction of my trumpet teacher, Byron Autry at Michigan State. To show you how long ago it was, it cost me $1.75. Further put it in perspective, every freshman at Michigan State had to have 3 books. They had to have the Irons book, $1.75. They had to have the Arbin Complete edition, this would be the 1936 edition, $6, and the Herbert L. Clarke, technical studies for $2.25. So for $10, that gave you your basics for starting out a music degree at Michigan State University back in 1959. That gets longer every year. Anyway, so I've been aware of Earl Irons since about 1955 when I first started studying with Byron Autry, and then had the opportunity to replace him when he finally fully retired. He retired as chairman, and then he retired from teaching, and then after that he still kept teaching students that were there. And then when I joined the faculty at Arlington State College, he finally hung up the teaching hand for good and taught a very few students. I studied with him for 3 years and became very, very close with both the colonel and his wife, Lena. And as Jeff said, I was a pallbearer at his funeral. But anyway, that's before now we put him away. Now let's go back and bring him to life. Earl Irons was born on March 10th of 1891 in Sulphur Springs, Texas. And it's interesting to note that he's born in Sulphur Springs, Texas, and while he traveled all over the country, his home always was really within 75 to 100 miles of Sulphur Springs, Texas. So basically, Dallas East, or Fort Worth East, was his stomping grounds in the great state of Texas. Now, his father was a violin player and a cornet player, and at an early age, Colonel started studying violin. It's interesting, father taught him violin, but not the cornet. And so he started out playing violins. Back in this time, there were a lot of community bands, and in Sulphur Springs, Texas, there was a community band. And Earl Irons started playing in this group on snare drum. And he saw the light, decided the snare drum was not the way to go, and traded his snare drum for cornet. And that's how he started going. I think he made a very, very good choice at that point. He studied cornet with G.W. Blake, who was a bandmaster and a composer that sort of itinerant, traveling around. Every time he was going to be in the area that Earl Irons heard about, he would find some way to go and take some lessons. Very precocious musically. At 15, he was the conductor of the community band in Sulphur Springs. And still in Sulphur Springs, he met and fell in love with his wife and was married in 1917. And Lena and Colonel Irons were just like one from that point on. Even on throughout their life, they were just constantly together, just a wonderful couple. Now, we're talking about a cornet player, and cornet playing was not something that you would make necessarily a lot of money at, let alone a living, and so he was interested in the art of tailoring. So he became a tailor. He had to get an excellent reputation specializing in men's clothing. He was very much a perfectionist, so if you had an Earl Irons piece of clothing, you knew that the material was top class and the fit was going to be perfect. So we're now still in the mid-teens. In 1917, the colonel was drafted into the Army. And the war, of course, at this point, 1917, was basically winding down. And he was assigned to the replacement band at Camp MacArthur, still in Texas, in the city of Waco. There he studied with Lieutenant Purtle and also studied theory and composition with Patrick Conway. Now, Patrick Conway was a very important name in early music education, band music. Now, if I believe correctly, he ended up as being head of the School of Music at Ithaca College in New York. So he was very much involved in the Army, of course, with music, studying composition. Still had time to be assigned to the tailoring shop, where he spent a lot of time altering uniforms. So that's the way it goes. We'll move forward into a photo that was taken not in 1917, but in the early 30s, of Earl Irons with his World War I uniform. Now, after the war, Colonel Irons went back to Sulphur Springs and opened his own tailoring shop. And while he was there, he reorganized and became the director of the Sulphur Springs Municipal Band. Also directed the Greenville American Band in Greenville, a town about 20 miles away. And then also became head of the violin and orchestra at the Burlington College in Greenville. So he was very much involved in covering an area, geographical area, of about a 40-mile wide radius. He was going back and forth. How he did it back there, I'm not quite sure, but Lena assured me that he was on the road a lot, but got a lot of things done. He gained quite a reputation for being an excellent musician band director, and was offered a full-time band director position in the town of Memphis, Texas, which is West Texas, out toward Abilene. And the Sulphur Springs Chamber of Commerce met and decided, we don't want to lose this guy. So they agreed that if Earl Irons would stay in Sulphur Springs, that they would match that salary. Obviously, he accepted it and promptly retired from the tailoring business, although he kept still designing and doing his own clothes well up into the 1950s. He did leave Sulphur Springs, though, in 1925 to go to the North Texas Agricultural College in Arlington as the band director and military band conductor. Now, not long after he accepted this position, the band went on a 13-week tour of the Redpath Boulder Chautauqua series, covered 7 states in 13 weeks. Now, the band was called the Lone Star Military Band. They gave 2 concerts each day. So there were 2 concerts, and Colonel Irons performed 2 cornet solos each day. So his reputation as a cornet player was really outstanding. Interesting, how did Colonel Irons get the name of Colonel? He was not in the Army long enough to become a colonel, per se. And he was in this military band. And so actually, if you're going to flat talk about rank, there would be other people in this military group that would outrank him. So in that case, the members of the band just tagged him with the name of Colonel so that he would be of higher rank and then get the respect that you would expect to have from a person with the Colonel idea. Well, that went over very well, evidently, because when he went back to Texas, he was named a colonel in the ROTC program. So then he has now actually some form of an official title of colonel. 1927, the Dallas Times-Herald wrote an article about Earl Irons. And the quote from that issue in 1927, Colonel Irons' solos both during the war and since have placed him in the ranks of great artists. So he had an excellent reputation. 1927, same year that little article came out, Earl Irons discovered golf. He became an avid golfer. And became the top-ranked amateur golfer in Texas and surrounding states. Now, everybody dreams about getting a hole-in-one. Colonel Irons had 14 holes in one, the last at age 72. So he was spending, I think, perhaps as much time on the cornet, with the golf club, as he was on the cornet. His wife, Lena, commented that the house they had 10-foot ceilings, and Earl's office was in the kitchen, where he had the table for doing his writing and his composition. He had this music stand for his cornet practicing, and had a place set up for practicing his golf swing. And she commented that it was amazing that all the time that he was doing that he didn't, break something drastic with the furniture, appliances, or whatever. She said, however, the linoleum floor took a beating and had to be replaced several times over the time that they were living in that house from his not quite hitting the mark, so to speak. During this time, he was also experimenting with cornet mouthpieces and formulated his own valve oil. And when I was teaching at North Texas State, John Haynie and I had a copy of this formula, and we formulated the oil by the gallon. So all the trumpet students in the late 60s at North Texas State were having complimentary bottles of Earl Irons valve oil, which worked very well. It also worked very well as a mosquito repellent, but that was not the real purpose of the creation. I'm going to talk more about his mouthpieces a little bit later. In Texas, the Texas State Fair is a big deal. Well, Texas is a big state. Colonel Irons was given the title of Superintendent of Music for the State Fair of Texas from 1929 to 1940. So there he was, being involved with musicians from all over the state, and became very active with that. Became a member of ABA, the American Bandmasters Association, in 1936, and served on the board of directors from 1940 to 48, and then became president in 1951. I think anyone here that's involved with band directing and professional organizations is very well of the fraternity Phi Beta Mu. But not many people know that Phi Beta Mu was established by Earl Irons in 1937. Also, this is a time where we have a lot of band contests, not city band contests, but regional band contests or state band contests. So you would have community bands, et cetera, that all gather for competition, much like you do, we have here with the high school band in competition, but it was for community bands because the public school bands were few and far between. And it was through this idea of the contest that Colonel Irons became very friendly and close friends with Ed Jeanette, Carl King, and of course Herbert L. Clarke. He met Herbert L. Clarke in 1930, and they had a very close relationship until the death of Herbert Clarke. Other famous people that were very close friends with Earl Irons was Walter Smith, Dr. Frank Simon, and Edwin Franco Goldman. Now, Colonel Irons did some studying at the Chicago Conservatory of Music with the trumpeters Richard Strauss and Noah Tarantino, and I know absolutely nothing about those gentlemen. As I told you how he got his colonel designation with the ROTC, well, in 1935, Earl Irons was commissioned as a lieutenant colonel on the governor's staff by Texas Governor Alfred. So now he's much more of a legitimate colonel. And everybody called Colonel, Colonel. The only person I ever heard call Colonel anything other than Colonel was Lena Irons, who never called him Colonel, but always called him Earl. And for you gentlemen who have been married, you know that Earl can be said with many different inflections. And I think in the 3 years that I was very close with the couple, I heard Earl in about as many types of intentions as you could say, from Earl to Earl. And but the two of them were just a wonderful couple, and I enjoyed being able to be with them. Now, we have to move forward. Today we can go to any store and see any number of photos of artists from the different instrument companies. Colonel Irons was a representative for King Instruments. In 1936, this was a photo that you would get if you were in a student in a store, or you could get it by mail from the H.N. White Company. Now, we also have a postcard that was used by various music stores, changing from the military uniform to the more formal tuxedo, still with the King Cornet. Now, on the back of this card, part of the comments include Colonel Earl D. Irons, Director of Band at North Texas Agricultural College, Arlington, Texas, is recognized as the finest cornet player and teacher in the Southwest. His remarkable range, together with his ability to lip trill difficult passages, has made his performance outstanding. Now, this is talk about Earl Irons' range. Now, if we look at the Arvin book pretty well stops at our high C. In 1938, the same year that the 27 groups of exercises came out, I have a quote from Colonel saying, "A cornet player who has any pride in his playing should not be satisfied with his range until he can play up to the second G above the staff, which would be the C above C." So at this point, he was really known for his power and his range. Switched companies. After several years with King, Colonel switched over and became a spokesman for the Reynolds brand. And so here we have a picture, doesn't have the formal attire. This time he's just in the very natty suit with his Reynolds Cornet. And so the two companies that he was involved with in this time was King and Reynolds. In 1942, Colonel became professor and head of fine arts at the North Texas Agricultural College. In 1942, he also was given an honorary doctorate from the Zollner Conservatory of Music in Hollywood. He spent several summers teaching at the Hollywood Conservatory. Now, Texas, just like South Carolina, is classed as a part of the Bible Belt. And this is one of my quotes that I really like for Colonel Irons. Colonel says, "A cornet player without an arbon is like a preacher without a Bible," which I think says a lot. In 1933, Milbert Carey organized the Tri-State Music Festival, which is a three-state, obviously, for Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, with the idea of having a band competition for bands from these three states. And it caught on and actually expanded, so now they have over a dozen states who are represented. Now, this festival was started in 1933, and Colonel Irons was involved as a judge, clinician, conductor from 1934 through 1965. This picture is with Frank Simon at the Tri-State Music Festival in Enid, Oklahoma in 1948. Frank Simon and Colonel Irons were very, very close. I've read numerous letters going back and forth. Anytime one of the new publication would come out, complimentary copies were sent back and forth. So they were very, very, very close. In fact, I had the opportunity through Colonel Irons to take a lesson from Frank Simon on how to play Willow Echoes in one easy lesson. And he really made it seem easy. He really did. But so they were very, very, very close. Now there are two teachers that Lena Irons considered to be Colonel's prize students. One of them was John J. Haynie, who was retired Professor Emeritus at North Texas State, now the University of North Texas. And concerning Earl Irons, John Haynie says, "To kids like myself, he was a hero. There was no one else we knew anything about. Colonel Irons' reputation was that of Mr. Cornet in the state throughout all those years. Kids at that time were awestruck by this man and what he could do and what he meant." Made a very, very strong, positive impression, both personally and musically. My mentor, Byron Autry, was the other person that Lena says Colonel considered to be one of his outstanding students. And this was given to me from Byron Autry after I had accepted the teaching position at Arlington State College and was going to be able to actually work with Colonel Irons. Byron Autry says, "Colonel Irons was the man that changed the pedagogical concepts of cornet playing for future generations. He was a major influence on my playing and also my teaching style. You are going to have the opportunity to learn from the master, and you will never forget the Colonel. And he will have a major effect on you as a person, a performer, and a teacher." Very true. The knowledge that I've picked up from Earl Irons is something that I will never forget. And it bothers me that the art of cornet playing is something which is being sort of just poo-pooed and ignored, because it's definitely a different style of playing and something that's a very important part of music history in the United States and music education. Now to a name everybody knows, Herbert Clarke. Colonel Irons and Herbert Clarke were very close friends. And from a letter from Herbert Clarke to Earl Irons, this is regarding the 27 groups of exercises, which you all have. The letter reads in part, "Let me congratulate you for carrying out the first elementary exercises for both lip muscles and breath control, which are most necessary for any good soloist to master, lip flexibility and a muscular embouchure. I am using your book in my practice now to make my playing easy and effective after my retiring from solo work. I use these exercises as a demonstration for my pupils." So I guess that you can't get much better than a plug from Herbert L. Clarke for your book. I said that Earl Irons was an avid golfer, very successful golfer, and golf had a major effect on Colonel's cornet playing. Here's a quote from Lena Irons. Excuse me. Need a little wet in my whistle here. In May of 1946, at the height of his career as a soloist, Colonel Irons, C.D. Richards, and Jim Ditto were playing golf in Arlington. They had all teed off on number 6 tee, and Uncle Jim went to the left in the rough. As a very bad golfer, I understand that. Colonel and CD went ahead on the fairway. I understand that. Uncle Jim hit his ball and yelled 4. And Colonel and CD looked up to see where the ball was going. The ball hit Colonel Irons square in the mouth, knocking out his teeth, tearing the lip tissue and lips. This ended a brilliant career as a soloist, plans to record, and also the cornet clinics that have been scheduled. It did end a solo career, but after a long siege with doctors, several surgeries and malignancies, he was able to get some strength back in his chops, enough to play and teach a little bit and to give a few clinics. But he never regained that edge that he had in his playing. Now after that, I should think you'd want to take the golf clubs and find the closest lake to throw them in or something. But that didn't deter the Colonel from playing golf, and his golf game actually improved. He played with Byron Nelson and Arnold Palmer. In 1952, he beat Ben Hogan. He beat the U.S. Open champion Julius Borros in 1953, and the U.S. Open champ Ed Fergel in 1955. So the cornet legend is gone, but the golf legend carries on. In fact, if you ask the name Irons in the golf area, it'll come up as, oh yeah, I remember who he was. But if you say that in the area, the band area, who's he? So he has gained much more fame and reputation for his golfing than over his cornet playing. I just wonder if he still had his original teeth and all that, and had been able to go ahead and do this recording, how much more well known he would have become. Very rarely did he play his cornet. Always had it when I was taking the lessons. Always had it there, but he would periodically pick it up and to demonstrate some things. One of the things that I remember him doing when he was talking about lip control, lip focusing, etc., is pick up the cornet and just played a chromatic scale from high F down to pedal C. Yeah, big deal. But he didn't use any valves. He just go bap, bap, bap. Sound was, perfectly frank, the sound was terrible, but we're talking about a guy in his 70s that is basically playing on no lips, no teeth. And he said, I'm not supposed to do that, and laughed because it wasn't supposed to be good for his heart. And he said, but that's the kind of chop control and focus that you really need to have. Moving on, this is a picture that was taken of Colonel Irons and Lena Irons at the TBA Convention in 1957. Lena pointed out that he was still designing his own clothes, and this is one of the jackets that he designed. Now, Colonel Irons retired as head of the Fine Arts Department in 1956, and from full-time teaching in 58, but he continued teaching brass students for the college until I was hired in 1964. I talked about the Enid, the Tri-State Music Festival. I auditioned, met the colonel and auditioned for my position at the Tri-State Festival in Enid, Oklahoma. The year I was there, they had like 12,000 participants. The whole city was just one giant music festival. Concert, solo, ensemble, marching, everything, with the judges from all over the country. Now, I went to Enid for this audition with Byron Autry because he was driving down there to be a clinician and soloist for the clinic. When I got there, I knew some information, but not a tremendous amount. Byron Autry said that he could tell me all kinds of stories, but he would rather wait till later, and just to say the effect that he'd had on him, on Byron Autry, and just make my own reactions to the man with no predetermined ideas. And as soon as I got there, I was amazed at how everybody knew Colonel and how admired and respected he was. He had a very contagious smile, a very wry sense of humor, and in all the times that I was with him, I never heard Colonel Irons say a negative word about any player, conductor, performer. Everything he always said was positive. And this is a time when everybody seems to be putting out digs at everybody, and here's this man that's all this respect and is never, was never blowing his own horn, so to speak, and is always just a straightforward, honest person, very friendly with everyone. So the longer I was around Colonel Irons, the more I'd hoped I'd get the job. Well, obviously I did. So then my duties when I went to Arlington into a new music facility, which was nice, was replacing Earl Irons. My assignment was to teach all brass and arrange for the marching band. And so that kept me out of mischief. I also was required to do at least one solo recital per semester and go on and travel around the state recruiting for Arlington State College. At Byron Autry's suggestion, on my very first recital at Arlington, I played cornet solo, on cornet, Emerald Isle, which turns out to be Colonel Irons' favorite solo of the many solos that he composed. Soon after I arrived in Arlington, I started meeting regularly with Colonel Irons for lessons. We would meet in his dining room. I'd be there with my cornet, and the Colonel was there with his ever-present cigar, and usually a little glass of bourbon deluxe over here. But every session I had with the Colonel had an effect on my performance and my knowledge of the cornet history, cornet playing. Colonel Irons wasn't interested in having me play, the current literature. He says, "I'm old, and I want you to learn about cornet playing, the style of cornet playing, how it affects to trumpet playing, of course, but to learn the cornet repertoire as would have been performed by the cornet players of that day, and so I would have the appropriate style and interpretation so that I could pass this on to my students." And this was very important that this be carried on because you remember, because of his golfing accident, Colonel Irons was not able to do any recordings, and so the only way that his solos would be heard the way he wanted them was if someone else did it. John Haynie recorded Song of the Pines, one of Colonel Irons' solos, and I recorded 4 separate solos. I did 2 commercial albums of solos for trumpet or cornet, and on each album I did 2 as in the style that Colonel Irons would like to have it performed. This next slide, as I said, Arlington State College had a new music building, and as you know, if you're trying to dedicate a building to someone, the problem with dedicating a building to someone is a person has to be dead. And so Colonel Irons did not qualify at this point for that. However, you could dedicate a specific facility, a specific room in honor of a person. And so this was the dedication program for the Colonel Earl Irons Rehearsal Hall, which was dedicated March 21st of 1965. If you notice, all of the compositions on there were by Earl Irons, and all of the conductors were former students of Earl Irons. And there's a picture of the people involved. In front and center is Colonel Irons and his wife, Lena. And then from left to right, Jack Mahan, who was a former student of the Colonel's, as I said, chairman of the music department then, myself, Gordon Collins, a band director from Owsley Junior High School in Arlington, Leighton Keith, band director at Castleberry High School in Fort Worth, Bill File, band director at Carter Junior High in Arlington, William Buddy Postlethwaite, who was the assistant band director, and then Dr. Cuthbert O'Neill. And if you read the opening of the 27 groups of exercise, it is Professor O'Neill that worked with all of the editing of the text for the 27 groups. And then last but not least is Alfred Riley, the band director at Fort Worth Technical High School. Each one of these individuals went on to be a very major player in the Texas Bandmasters Association and all held statewide offices in that group. In 1965, the Texas Bandmasters Association named Earl Irons as the Bandmaster of the Year, which of course is the highest honor that the organization had. Late in 1965, the Colonel's health started to decline, and he had his ups and downs for the next while. But by the spring of 1967, his health was really, really failing quite badly. Now, this is a program, my last recital at Arlington State College before I joined the faculty at North Texas State. And I talked over this program with the Colonel. I said, well, I'd like to, perform my last recital, play a couple of your solos. And so you pick 2. And the 2 that he picked were the Emerald Isle and then the Cedar Vale. Now, as I said, Frank Simon and Colonel Irons were very close friends, and Frank Simon had just passed away earlier that spring, and so we put on the program Willow Echoes as a memoriam to Frank Simon. Colonel Irons died in Fort Worth on May 19th of 1967, and he was buried in Sulphur Springs, Texas, and I was one of the pallbearers. Now, the quote from the Texas Bandmasters Association Irons biography, after giving him the Bandmaster of the Year, says, Colonel Irons' influence is indicated throughout the minutes of the Texas Music Educators Association and its predecessors beginning in 1920. Those who knew him will be eternally grateful for the privilege. His ever-present cigar, his proficiency on the golf course, and his quick wit endeared him to all. Colonel Irons was one of the great pioneers in American music education. And with that, I'm very happy to have the fact that Jeff selected the 27 groups of exercises as a text, and for me to have a chance to shed a little bit of light on who Earl Irons really was. A very tremendous, tremendous person. Now, I move on, I talked about mouthpieces. This is an Earl Irons mouthpiece. All of his mouthpieces are stamped Earl Irons, Arlington, Texas. Now, that's a little bit different. Now, this mouthpiece was different because it was designed to be heavier and thus balance the instrument. The old cornets were quite bell heavy, and so it would be a bit awkward. If any of you have ever picked up a trombone without the counterweight, you know, that's the extreme example of balance. But if you had a heavier mouthpiece, that would then shift the weight. The instrument would set easier in the hand and feel balanced. A little bit of a contrast, though. A Boucher cornet mouthpiece from 1914 and the Earl Irons mouthpiece. The Boucher mouthpiece weighs 1.4 ounces. This mouthpiece weighs 6.1 ounces. There's also a different contour, and this one weighs 7.3 ounces. So it was a lot of weight difference. There were different weights for the different mouthpieces, for the different instruments manufactured to try to get this balance. Mouthpieces were selling okay, but then the nasty instrument manufacturers decided to change the balance on the instrument. The weight shifted so that the horn was now balancing on the second valve, etc. So all of a sudden there was not a market for these mouthpieces. And Earl Irons sold all that he had, and the rest that were not finished plating were put in the corner of his dining room. And all of us know how brass players are very, in some areas, procrastinators, shall we say, you know, everything from doing the dishes to taking out the trash. So anyway, these mouthpieces in various states of reform sat in the corner of the living room, the dining room for years. And I found this out in a very unusual way. After Colonel died, then Lena, who was in her 70s, became a bit concerned about being at her house without having, you know, with bushes overgrown, etc. And so she asked if I would come over. I did a lot of everything from moving furniture, changing light bulbs, fixing screens, to yard work that needed to be done, as both of them were in their 70s. And being in your 70s in the 60s is quite different from being in your 70s in the year 2012, as I can attest. So anyway, I was over there working on things, and I'm hoeing away some stuff in front of the driveway, and all of a sudden, I catch something. And I look down, and it's kind of strange. It's a mouthpiece. I dig a little bit more, came up with another one. So I go over and say, Lena, what's this? Was the colonel growing mouthpieces out here in the backyard or what? And she goes back to the story about, well, he had these mouthpieces that the market had gone away because of this, that, and the other thing, and they just kept sitting in the corner of that dining room. And so I said, Earl, do something with those or I'm going to do something with them. Yeah. Do something. Yeah. Well, he didn't, and she did. She took these mouthpieces out, and they had a garage. Now, the garage they had the house was built in about 1900, so it really wasn't a garage by our standards. It was a dirt floor with a shed, sort of a shed, you know, that you could keep your Model T covered from the inclement weather. So over the years, the garage just fell into disuse. His Cadillac was too big to fit in the garage or anything else out there. And so the garage basically fell down, was carried away, and these mouthpieces were long just forgotten about until I'm back there with my rake digging things up. So I kept going, and I dug up about 1.5 bushels of mouthpieces. So we sat down with a list of Earl Irons students and friends that we thought might like to have one of these mouthpieces, and then gave them to them. And then she said, you take the rest of them and pass them on or do something with them. But that's the story behind the mouthpieces. So this mouthpiece here, this nice gold-plated mouthpiece, looked like, there are the 4 shapes. This gold-plated mouthpiece originally looked like that. And it's amazing what you can do to clean it up. So I cleaned this up, had it gold-plated, and used it as a paperweight. And my son's middle name is Earl, after Earl, which was a family disaster, but we don't want to talk about that either. So that eventually, my son Byron Earl will have his own paperweight. And so some of my students that have received advanced degrees have been able to earn one of these mouthpieces. And so there are several of my graduate students have Earl Irons mouthpieces sitting on their desks. And if you'd like to come up and take a look at them afterwards, I'd be happy to show them to you. And this is the picture of Earl Irons that was taken at his dedication and is on display at the School of Music office. Okay, here we have a list of the musical accomplishments of Earl Irons. So you can follow it quickly through, starting with the military, going on up, in a very large list of activities, for a very important man in the history of the cornet. Now, if we go into what he did pedagogically, which is probably even more important, there's several things to need to talk about. The embouchure. The old embouchure was simply very simple. You take the chops and you stretch them back, smile, and then you take the horn and you push. Basically, that's it. Earl Irons' embouchure idea was to focus toward the center, not to stretch the tips into a smile. So the aperture is going to be roughly like this, and then it will go like this as you go into the upper or lower register. Also, the early Arvin idea was to put the horn straight on the face. And Earl Irons says that that's really not logical. The instrument needs to have some sort of a natural, slightly downward angle. This is more comfortable, and it also puts less pressure on the upper lip. Now, in talking about flexibility and the Claude Gordon exercises and the Irons exercises, Clarke exercises, we're all talking about embouchure. Now, I'd like you to we'll do a little calisthenic here. I'd like you just to form an embouchure and just buzz. It sounds like mosquitoes, not wasps. We can use a little more air. Now, I'd like to have you do the same thing again, and I would like you to take the teeth aperture and spread it, like so. And it quits. Reverse the procedure and bring the teeth together. And it quits. Same buzz, take the jaw and move it forward. It quits. Same thing, you bring the jaw back, and you slobber on your shirt. So, but somewhere in that, for every person, is going to be a place that seems relatively comfortable. And that's what Earl Irons said, no, that's your basic buzz. That's what should feel comfortable and should be a point of reference. Now, the mouthpiece also, we should have, if your teeth are going like this, or jaws, the instrument itself is going to be making a slight amount of change. If your teeth come more apart, come closer together, you're going to have that sort of a motion. And the object, you want to keep the lips vibrating. The upper lip, by the way, is the primary vibrating source. The lower lip is more of a secondary source, according to the research of Lloyd Leno. And so it makes sense to let that upper lip vibrate. The more pressure you put on that upper lip, you got it here, and you're going like, vibrate, and it's not going to work. So then the object is to let the lip be free to vibrate. So he says the teeth aperture should decrease slightly for the upper register and open slightly for the lower register. He also said to extend the pedal register down, and through that by just doing normal pedal tones, but to be sure that you did it with the normal fingerings, not alternate fingerings. The idea there was to focus the sound and to work for a good controlled sound. With articulations, the idea of the ta for low and the t for high for the tonguing syllables. And then the tongue is not between the teeth, but it's behind the teeth. You're not pushing forward, but it's actually a retrograde pull. And so that is very crucial. Now, yet in multiple tonguing, you want to utilize both the TTK and the TKT strokes for the triple tonguing, and TK or KT for double tonguing. When the tongue starts to get, the triple tongue starts to get tired, starts limping along. If you take a look at a triplet with a TTK, or TTK, I guess that would be, and you just say normally TTK, 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 it sort of limps on that last syllable. If you put the K in the center, it's like a 16th in the middle, is more self-perpetuating. So the object there then is for passages that you want to, for perpetuating the even passage, the K in the middle would be easier. So if you were going to do something with multiple tonguing, you could also just do both ways. Let me see if this will work without a warm-up. The tongue works fine. Fingers, man, I'm going to talk about that. Anyway, now I'd like to get into the idea of the exercises just very quickly. Colonel always started with group 7, and he would always start in the middle and work both ways. I said, why'd you've got it printed, obviously, just going up from the F sharp to the C. He says, well, that's what everybody did. But my idea is you start in the middle and work both ways. You're going to be getting a separate chop set for each one. Also, you're having to concentrate more because you can't just close your eyes and do a chromatic pattern. This way it makes you have to work and focus the pitches, and it gives you a little bit of range. Same thing, by the way, for the Clarke Technical Study number 2, which we all do. How many of you do Clarke 2 regularly? How many of you do Clarke 2 starting at the beginning and get all the way to the end? The number of hands went down. But the idea that this idea works the same thing with that Clarke Technical Study. By doing every third one, I like numbering 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 all the way through it. Do the 1s, and then go do the 2s, and then goes the 3s. Each time you're making just a very slight change in register, but you're having to have a change in mindset, a change in ear set to get it. Also, if you start doing them just chromatically, you get tired halfway through, the other half never gets played. This way, you're going to, in rotation, get everything covered. After 7, group 14 was his favorite exercise. And with this, it was very simple. The 7th partial is a flat pitch on the instrument, right? So the idea here was to go up to that 7th partial and get it so that it is in tune with the idea of the E syllable and working it that way, starting it slowly and then speeding it up. Then we go to group 12. Group 12 was his next favorite one. Number 12 is interesting because it goes past that 7th partial with the idea of going on past, not da-da-da, but always, never the first note going on just to hold the series. Da-da-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Earl Irons was also an authority, an expert, or demanded that everybody be able to sing whatever they're playing with the syllables. If you can't sing it, you can't play it. If you're singing it, what has to be moving? The air. Without the air, if you're just going somewhere. Also, in doing these things, anytime you're doing vocalizing, practicing syllables, the embouchure should be set in a position. Because if you just say with me, just normally, two. Now form an embouchure and do the same thing. Yeah, I'm getting there. Now, you can feel the difference in that type of setting. The idea here, 20, taking a break in between. This is all pretty self-explanatory. Let me get to this exercise. This is an exercise that Colonel gave to me. And as you look at it, it's pretty cut and dried. And you got to remember, back at this time, I was in my mid-20s, and I was at times pretty full of myself. I mean, I was doing all this playing, doing big band work, doing symphony work, recitals, all that sort of stuff. So I felt I pretty much had cast iron chops. So he gave me this exercise and talked to me about it. And I said, great. So, okay. About 3 weeks later, I'm packing up, getting to go out the door. It's sort of a Columbo moment. He says, hey, Keith, I got a question for you. And I said, fine, what is it? He says, you remember that exercise I gave you 3 weeks ago, that ascending scale? Ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. I enthusiastically said, oh, yeah, of course, yeah. And then he said words that cut. Why aren't you doing it? And that was just like putting the knife in. And I said, he says, never mind, I thought I just asked. So I put my tail between my legs and limped out. He says, how do you know? Found out very rapidly how he knew. This is an exercise that I just like to quickly explain it. Always take a full breath, and you always have to bring the horn from above, and start on the second line G. Why second line G? It's middle register. It's a middle note. And everything is always like a pickup. Every articulation, every note, first note, should be attacked. Breath accents, he said, do not exist. And project the air through the instrument. So you do something like this. Et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the object. The object is to project the sound. And as you do this, when you go up, relax the left hand. When you relax the left hand, you're also relaxing, getting the pressure off the face. And if you don't keep the air going, you're dead. So IG is, we already heard it this afternoon, air, air, air. Let the air do all the work. And then after doing the first one, rest 4 bars. I always said to do this with the metronome. Then just go up chromatically. Etc. until you get to the G. Always making sure that the air keeps going and working out. And after that, just go up doing the scale, the diatonic scale, up by half steps, resting each time. You get up to the top, maybe give it a second time or a third time, but never let yourself sit there and do that gritting down and pushing in. Always letting the air go. And after doing something in the upper register, he also always said, you need to do something to relax the chops, something in the middle register. And so then he's like, oh, that Clarke technical study number 2, starting on G, just in the middle register. But if you take I can leave you any one thing that we talked about embouchure and things, is a way to really help work with air control, chop focus, is this exercise here. When I started doing it and went back, after I'd been doing it for a while, again, one of the comments that Earl Irons made to me was, well, I see you started playing that ascending scale exercise I gave you a while back. But this one little exercise will do wonders. It increased my endurance. It gave me about a major third more range. And so I would strongly suggest that that be what we do. So I know I've run over. I wasn't able to talk fast enough. And so I do have with me recordings of the Emerald Isle. We don't have time to do it because I've yacked myself. Or do we have time to do an Emerald Isle? We don't. Okay. But anyway, a little bit about Earl Irons, his teaching. To me, the most wonderful person. Had a very lasting effect on my attitude toward cornet playing. And I can't do any of the cornet solos of Earl Irons on the trumpet. One of the last things he said to me, we had 3 questions. One was, you're going to North Texas, I'm happy about you and all that. Will you keep using my exercise, Earl Irons 27 groups? I'd been using it since 1955, of course. Second question, would I continue to teach his solos as representative literature? Of course, yeah, of course, because I really think they're real fun to play. And the third thing was a request. He says, whenever you play my solos, I'm going to ask you, will you always play it on the cornet? And I can't pick up the trumpet and play an Earl Irons solo without just feeling tremendous guilt. So anyway, hope I haven't run over too much here, Jeff, but I appreciate having the chance to come and talk with you today.